we've got Mike Kernaghan here for this episode of Beyond the Bias with Alex Reid, which is a name that I'm mostly sold on. We'll see how it goes. But thank you, Mike, for joining me. And I thought we'll start right at the beginning of quite a wide-ranging conversation, but right at the start, for you and bowls, what was the start for that? How did it begin?
So my dad had been introduced to the game, a long time ago now, 40-odd years ago. And he suggested I come along and have a role at the North East Valley Bowling Club. And so reluctantly I did, as you do with your dad.
Yeah.
And look, it was okay. Didn't jump out at me as something I'd want to do. But what made me join for that first year was there were about half a dozen guys my age, like Terry Scott, one or two others that were my age. And I thought, that's not a bad place to be. There's a few young fellas there, so I might as well give it a go. So that's how it started. Played for a year, and then I was heavily involved in football, and just played for that 1 year, and then I moved to Nelson to play National League football up there, and so my bowls career was short and sweet at that point.
And was it sort of after the football had come and gone that you thought bowls might be an option after that, Mike?
Yeah, so when I came back to Dunedin 3 or 4 years later, I started playing again, but was only playing sort of October to December, and then pre-season football started. So it was when I was about 32 that I actually started to take the game seriously, because being the competitive person I am, it was an outlet for that competitiveness. So that's when I got into it fairly seriously.
Absolutely. And sort of on that note, I suppose, if you look back at sort of your early days at bowls, are there any sort of early successes or early wins that you reflect on fondly?
Yeah, look, the event that got me going, really, I won a Super Bowls back in the day. I went to the national finals and got through to the semi-finals of that national Super Bowls. And in those days, it was the winner went over to England to play in that World Indoor Singles. And there was a guy called John Mears, who a lot of people know, who was in Blenheim at the time, and he had an invitation singles event, and he was at the Super Bowls final, and because I got to the semi-final, he asked if I'd be interested in going to that Blenheim invitation singles, and so that was a nice surprise. So I was still very much a young player in terms of years of experience, and somehow I won that. So that sort of set me off, and that was $5,000. That was at 1990, I think.
Absolutely.
And that was a lot of money in those days. So I think I played Brian Baldwin in the quarterfinals, Ryan Brassey in the semi-final, and played Gary Lawson in the final, and somehow won. I got no idea how that happened.
Don't question it.
Yeah. So and then at the end of 1990 at the Nationals Championships, I got invited to a New Zealand trial and played with Morris Symes and Jeff Hawken in the triples, and another, I think it might have been Bruce Ballinger in the fours with those other two, and won 5 out of 5. And so I guess there was a fair bit of luck played its part in playing with good players, but that was sort of the start of when the national selectors sat up and took notice, I guess.
Absolutely. And just before I want to have a chat about what it was like to play for New Zealand, but before we get to that, anyone who's seen you play, and I'll explain it just on the off chance someone hasn't, but you have like a static delivery, so you take a step, then swing your arm. How did that come about? Did you see someone play like that, or was it just something that you found in your own delivery worked? How did your delivery happen?
I read a book. It was a book that was, I think, published in about 1912. And I'm serious when I say that. It just explained the pendulum theory to me. And in those days, you've got to remember, the greens were a little bit quicker back in those days. Sort of 18 seconds was not unusual. In fact, it was more the norm rather than anything else. And so rather than get a lot of body momentum going forward, and this is getting a bit technical, this book showed me that, or indicated that if I had a relatively fixed stance and just let the arm swing and a pendulum swing, I'd be able to judge my weight a little bit better, and so that stuck with me ever since.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lovely delivery. I know, having seen video, I think, did John Murtagh have a similar delivery, and he was the national coach for a time as well, which I suppose is quite nice if we think about it, because now you're the national coach with a, a fixed stance delivery, but just sort of interesting to think about how all that came about. So I suppose if we move on now to like your first bunch of playing for New Zealand, so we're at 1990, 1991, and you've won 5 out of 5 in the trial. Did you have an inkling that might lead on to greater things?
No. It was actually, I mean, I was probably picked too young or too early to be fair, but in 1991 there was a tour of Britain for a month. And I think the idea behind that was the world champs were going to be in Worthing in 1992. And so I think they wanted to pick their sort of shadow 5, if you like, for world bowls to go on that tour. And luckily for me, Rowan Brassey and Peter Bellis pulled out of that. And so they obviously needed to find a lead to take Brass's place. And I guess I had the right performances at the right time, and I was very surprised to get a phone call to say that I'd been selected in that team.
That must have been a pretty big thing for you. A month overseas. So sort of, if you hadn't been planning it, what was the response once you got the phone call? Did you have to go around and like talk to family and friends and bowlers and say, "Look, I'm I'm going up north for a while"? How did that happen?
Well, I was actually in Waimate at the time. My wife Jan, her father was living in Waimate, and I remember we were sitting in Jan's dad's place playing cards, and there was this phone call, and Jan's dad said, "Oh, it's for you," and I thought, who the hell would know I was in Waimate? So I'd obviously taken a bit of time to track me down. So look, it was pretty exciting. Obviously, I had to talk to work about whether or not I could get the time off. They were pretty excited that I'd been selected in a New Zealand team, and so to be fair, it wasn't too much of a hassle. The only challenge was that our son was 6 months old when all this happened, so it was a bit of a nightmare for Jan to be home alone for a month with a wee one and having to cope with all of that.
Absolutely. And do you remember your first game for New Zealand, Mike? The first game of that tour, and can you talk us through, if you do remember it, how were you feeling before that first game?
So I can't remember who we played, but I was playing a game of pairs with Neville Hill. He skipped and I led, and Neville was the other guy that came into the team. So Philip Scogman Jr., Morris Symes and Kevin Darling were the three. I think that would have been with PB and with Brass, and so Neville and I were the two that got the nod, and we played a game of pairs at Worthing. I can't remember, who we played, but it didn't go well. We lost comfortably. We also played David Bryant and Tony Alcott.
That's not a bad pair.
In a game, yeah. Well, as you can imagine, that didn't go too well either. But look, it was just a fantastic experience. How did I feel? Look, I was just excited, I think, to be able to be playing against these superstars very early in my career.
Do you think after that month, that when you came back to New Zealand, did you notice a change in your game or the way you read ahead or anything sort of, were there many learnings from that month that you spent in the Northern Hemisphere, or did it not really apply to our New Zealand Greens?
Well, yeah. See, the Greens are running a 10 or 11 over there, and it was my first experience on something that heavy. I mean, I think we coped reasonably well. In fact, after the first week, Mel Morrison, who was the manager, he decided that young Philip and I would play pairs together, and Philip skipped and I led, and we actually played really well and got some very good results, and so came back feeling pretty happy with my first hit out. And obviously Peter, Philip and I played together in '94 at the Commonwealth Games in the pair.
Excellent. And that was that in Victoria? Is that a place? No.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's right.
Yes.
Victoria, just the Victoria Island, just off the coast of Vancouver.
Okay. Oh, that's a good segue to then. So the '94 Com Games. So that would be your
Yep.
first Commonwealth Games. How did that go? What was that like?
Well, it was a fantastic experience, and as it turned out, in those days they used to just split the field up into two sections, and we played a round robin. So we had about 11 games, I think. We had about 12 in our section and 12 in the other section. And just so happened the draw, just about every strong nation was in our section apart from Ireland and Wales. So you had South Africa and England and Australia and Hong Kong in those days, which Mark McMahon was playing for. It was just a very lopsided draw, and we did all right. And we went into the last game, and in those days, the winner of the two sections played off the gold, and two second place getters played off the bronze. And heading into the last game, we played Australia in the last game, and the winner of that was going to win the section and play off the gold. Well, we lost and finished fifth in our section.
Oh, bugger.
And Australia went on, I think it was Cameron Curtis and I forgot his name now. Anyway, they went on to win the gold. So we lost by 4 or 5 in that last section game.
Okay, so we're about sort of, because your career, you played for a bit and then you stopped. So can we fast forward to the end of the first stint of your international career, and can you talk us through how that went for you? And then if you feel like talking about it, can you just talk us through why there was that little break sort of at the turn of the millennium?
Yeah, look, so I actually had a role with Bowls New Zealand in '96. I started, and that sort of meant that I couldn't. It was a bit naff for me to make myself available when I was heavily involved in working with John Murder in the high performance program. So didn't play in '98, and then finished with Bowls New Zealand in '99. Won the New Zealand singles in 2001, 2002, and got the singles berth at for Manchester in 2002, and got a bronze medal there. And then we went on another tour of Britain in 2003, and did okay actually. It was to celebrate the England centennial, and so came back from that thinking I was a shoo-in for 2004 World Bowls and didn't get picked. So I was a bit disappointed with that. That's putting it mildly. And I guess, after 10 or 12 years, maybe 2/3 of it playing for New Zealand and not getting that opportunity to play in the World Bowls was a huge disappointment. So I basically didn't play. I stopped playing. Well, I didn't basically. I did stop playing and didn't play again until 2010, 2011, apart from a Nationals in Dunedin where my best mate Dave Archer said, why don't we play pairs together? And so that was the only event I played in between 2004 and 2011. Then it all started again.
Yeah, in that break, because it must be nice to have some time. Did you ever find yourself missing bowls, or did you just find other stuff to sort of take your time and enjoy your life a little bit?
Well, during that period, our children were 2004. Our children were 14 and 12, and so we just got heavily involved in what they're doing. And Liam, bless him, decided the bagpipes was something he wanted to do. So that was an interesting experience. And Kate was very much into sport, so we just immersed ourselves in following and supporting them, really, and it didn't really cross my mind to, and I didn't miss the game too much because, as I say, I was a bit grumpy quite a long time after that non-selection in 2004.
Fair enough. Well, just quickly segue, you said bagpipes. That sounds interesting.
Yep.
What can you tell me about the bagpipes, and what's that look like in New Zealand? Are they like competitions or bands, or how does it work?
Yeah, so I have zero musical ability. My wife Jan does have some, and Liam, as I say, came home one day and said, I want to learn how to play the bagpipes. And He's done fantastically well, actually. He's been a New Zealand solo champion and a New Zealand pipe band champion, and it's still a huge passion of his. So it was really just an incredible experience to be involved in that, and to meet a whole new group of people that I would never have had the opportunity to meet if Liam hadn't got stuck into the pipes. And he's spent a lot of time in Scotland over the years, going over to World Champs and whatnot, and he's done particularly well. So, and we've made a lot of good, nice new friends over the years because of bagpipes. There's a real, just like bowls, really, a real community of people that are passionate about something.
Cool. I hadn't appreciated that there was that level of competition. That sounds like it would have been quite a neat thing to be involved in. I think it's a bit late for me to start the bagpipes, Mike, so I'll leave that to I'll leave that to others. So right, we're back on track. So you've had your little break. Was there any reason why you thought you should come back to bowls? Was there unfinished business?
Well, I think the kids by that stage were 20 and 18, and Kate moved off to Hamilton to go to uni up there and to follow a hockey dream, and so there was a bit more time, I guess, and it sort of decided to have another crack. Well, just to start playing again, really, for no other reason than I had a bit more time.
Was there a response? So, the time you're away is enough time for another generation of bowlers to come through who might not have known you to their peril. Did you have in those sort of the first season that you come back, did you come across anyone who didn't know who you were and were then sort of not expecting what they got?
Well, I honestly can't remember, to be fair. I guess a lot of the people were still around from, back in 2003, 2004. Were there any new people on the block? I mean, hard to remember, to be fair. Likes of Shannon McElroy and those sorts of people were popping their head above the parapet. Ali Forsyth was relatively new. So, although they were both, I think, in the New Zealand team by that stage, but they were guys that I hadn't really had a lot of contact with because they were very much, as I say, at the beginning of their careers in 2003, 2004. In fact, Shannon would have been just a very young kid at that stage. And look, I didn't have any aspirations. I just wanted to play again and just enjoy it.
Yeah, I suppose that's another quick question before we go on to what did happen is when you came back sort of after that 8 years, so to put it into perspective for those who don't know, Bowls New Zealand amalgamated the women's and the men's, whatever you call them, associations in 97. So when you left the game in, say, 2003, a lot of clubs still would have been not amalgamated. By the time you came back in 2011, did you come back to a slightly different sport?
Not really. Look, I think the amalgamation was a really good move. Personally, that's the view that I have. I think it's one sport. We used to have what I think is a bit of a silly situation where you go along to, let's say, the North East Valley Club, and you'd have two clubs in there. You'd have the men's club and the women's club in it. And I guess looking back, with hindsight, that didn't make a lot of sense. So I think amalgamation's been really good for the game. Did it make any difference to how, my enjoyment or how the game was played? I don't think it did. It just meant that we were just one group of people all enjoying a wonderful sport.
Yeah, keep it simple, eh? Absolutely. Okay, so you're back and were you on 4 national titles upon your return, or was it 3?
3.
3.
Yeah, so I'd won a couple of singles and a pairs by then. So lucky enough I actually had a very, very good fours team in 2014 when we won the national fours. So had Mike Nagy, Tony Grantham, Andrew Kelly and me.
Oh yeah, that's okay.
And it was in Dunedin. So yeah, and look, I'm not sure how that came about, to be honest, but anyway, it was in, as I say, in Dunedin, and we got through to the final, and we howling sou'wester as Dunedin can and pretty cold, but we were lucky enough to win that. and then won the singles in 2015 up in Browns Bay. I think was headquarters back in those days.
Mm.
And also won the Intercentre. I think it was 2014 we won the Intercentre, and I played the singles for Dunedin and have won all 8 of my singles games. And Dave Edwards Scruff was on my back about making myself available for New Zealand again, and after those couple of successes, and I really didn't have any desire, to be honest, to play again. And then Kevin Hicklin and Andy McLean, both independently of each other, said to me, the last thing you want to do, Mike, is be sitting in your rocking chair when you're 75 and going, what up?
Yeah.
And that really resonated, I think, because the World Championship in 2016, and so I rang Scruff up and said, look, I'll make myself available, and that was 2015.
Absolutely. Now, just quickly, because I want to talk about the World, I won't spoil it, but I want to talk about the World Championships that you played in, and it may have gone okay. But the singles you won, that last singles, that was to get your gold star, which, I mean, you've joined, that's a pretty small list of people who have won a gold star for 5 Open National Championships. When you were playing your singles final, at any point did you think about the gold star, or did it only happen after you'd won the game?
No, I didn't think at all about that, and that's honest. One of the things I've been really lucky with is that I started using a sports psychologist back in 1989, and so I had a fairly decent set of mental skills, if I can say that. So it was, and what I learned really early was that never to focus on the outcome, and it's always about what's in front of you right now. And so effectively, the only thing that you're concerned about is the next bowl. You can't change what happened with the previous bowl, that's done. But all you can do is focus on that next bowl. And so that's always been the way I played right from very early. And I guess that's had a significant impact on the successes that I've had. And so no stage in that singles final did I even think about a gold star. I didn't even, to be fair, I wasn't even thinking about winning per se. It was very much about what I need to do to win that end, I guess.
Yeah, I find that really interesting, because almost everyone I talk to has a very similar answer to that. Like if you look at these successful bowlers, or you talk to people who've done well, I suppose, in any sport, that's essentially what it boils down to, isn't it? You just focus on your process, just the little things. And I suppose the ones that don't focus on little things are the ones that go, oh no, and then it all falls apart. It sort of intrigues me that's
Yeah, and Peter Bellis and Mark DeLacy wrote a book, which quite a long time ago now, and it very much was focused around the importance of mental skills in the game. So Peter obviously learnt that very, very early in his career, and I'd suggest that's one of the key, if not the key factor in the magnificent success that he's had over the years.
Absolutely. No, it's interesting. Okay, so we're going to go back onto your playing career before we move on to a bit of the coaching stuff. So we're in 2016. We're hosting the World Championships at Burnside. You've made yourself available. Did you have an inkling of where you might be picked in the team, Mike?
Well, we had the Asia Pacific, which is in 2015, which was also in Christchurch, and for some reason they decided to pick me in the singles, and lost the final to Aaron Sheriff, and I think, what did we do in the fours? I think we got a bronze or a silver in that as well. No, not the fours, the pairs. We got a bronze. Shannon and I got a bronze in the pairs. And so I thought I had no chance of playing the singles at World Bowls, nor did I want to be frank, because Shannon was clearly the best singles player in the country, and history proved how good a singles player he was. So I played in the pairs with Shannon, and then obviously in the fours with Mike Nagy, that name again, and Blake Signal and Ali Forsyth.
And how did it go, Mike? You go. Yeah, you talk.
Yeah. Well, I probably let Shannon down a little bit. We got we won our section of the pairs, which gave us direct entry into the semi-final, and the first 5 ends in the semi-final of the pairs, we played Highland, Gary Kelly, and was it Ian McClure or?
Yeah, one of them.
Remember.
I can remember watching the final.
And I was poor in those first 5 ends, and they got out for 6 or 7-1 in front. And then after that, I played reasonably decent. Shannon played good, and we lost by that 4 or 5. So that was really disappointing to do that, because we hadn't lost a game up till then, and had played pretty well together. So while I was pleased with the medal, you look back and if it wasn't for those first 4 or 5 ends that I played particularly poorly, we might have been playing in the final. As it turned out, Ireland lost to Aaron Wilson and Brett Wilkie in the final comprehensively, really. And they beat Alex Marshall and Paul Foster in their semi-final of the Australian. So it wasn't a bad pairs field back in the day. And then the second week, obviously, the men went to the singles and fours. And look, we never lost a game and won all of our games, including the semi-final and final, by an average of about 17 shots, I think. So it was a pretty dominant display, and all 4 of us played very well during the whole week.
Yeah, I remember watching the final from wherever I was. It might have been on Sky, and it was just, I think if you were to look for a perfectly functioning fours team and look at what the positions were doing, you guys ticked that off, eh? Like, it was just a lovely example of good fours play. And I think as a New Zealander, I don't think there was any Kiwi who watched it and was disappointed based on your opposition.
Yeah, well, we played Aussie in the final, and they had a bloody good side. I mean, Mark Casey and Aaron Wilson, Brett Wilkie and Barry Lester. So that's a fairly formidable 4, but we just managed to play the right bowls at the right time and won very, very easily. So, yeah, it was a huge thrill. It was something that you look back on fondly, obviously, and we're 4 guys that complemented each other, as you've suggested.
Absolutely. And after that, did you think to yourself, I can happily be in my rocking chair now? Was that sort of when you decided to to call an end on the high-performance playing side of things?
No, so I kept playing, and then I made myself unavailable in 2018, and I had a big job. So I was CEO of the Cancer Society National Office, and there was a lot going on, and it just was really difficult to afford the time to make myself available for a big campaign like that. So I didn't play in that, and then 2019 I played again in the Asia Pacifics over in Aussie, and was picked for the World Bowls team in 2020, but of course that was postponed or cancelled because of COVID, and they're going to play the 2020 World Champs this year in 2023. So, but 2020, when it was cancelled, I think I played in something at the beginning, might have been a Trans-Tasman in February 2023 or the end of January, whenever it was, and that was sort of the last time I played, and I just knew it was time. There was an opportunity to get into the Sharon Sims retired from her role as high performance, one of the high performance coaches, and so I took the opportunity to apply for that, and so that really was the end of my playing career and the beginning of my involvement in the high performance coaching space.
Do you have any regrets with your playing career, Mike? Do you look back and go, "Oh, I wish I'd done something," or are you pretty content?
Oh, look, there's always like that. That semi-final of the pairs that I've talked about. That's a major regret, because I think Shannon and I were playing really well. Shannon and I didn't play a lot of games together, and we only lost 3. I think he's kept the record, and we played something like 50 or 60 games and only lost 3 together. So I guess that semi-final at the World Champs was probably a bit of a disappointment, and something I'll look back on and go, why the hell did you play so poorly in those first 5 ends? But anyway, it is what it is. But no regrets. I mean, you win some and you lose some, and I've had my fair share of successes, so I'm reasonably happy.
Absolutely. Now, so I want to talk a bit about a couple more things, and we'll finish with your coaching. But just quickly, your bucket hat. Can we just quickly go on a segue to the bucket hat? Why? And do you think you've been part of popularising it?
It's just common sense. I mean, and working for the campsite, even though I wasn't when I first started working, when I first started wearing the bucket hat, we have the highest incidence of skin cancer in the world here in New Zealand, and wearing a bucket hat just gives you more coverage in terms of your ears and your neck and all that sort of thing, rather than a cap. And so right from the very beginning, I wore a bucket hat. and it was more about common sense than about wanting to make a fashion statement. So hence the nickname very early in my career of Hats Floppy, and I think that was that nickname was given to me by Peter Keane, who I played a lot of bowls with back early in my career.
Absolutely, and it's good now that I do note that the New Zealand team has an official bucket hat that is an option for the players if they wish to wear them. And I recall Erin Nurka, who is very, what would you say? She's aggressive about people not getting sunburnt. I can remember her telling a few of the New Zealand team off for not wearing their bucket hats when we were over there.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, and look, there are more and more people wearing them now, so it's kind of cool.
No, they are good. I like them. Okay, so quickly before we get into the coaching as well, I just wanted to pick your brain. You've sort of been around the sport for a while, and we've watched our greens change and get a bit slower, which is obviously a key point, and the bowls have gotten less turny. So I've sort of answered my own question, but I wanted to ask you, in your time, if we think about the way bowls is played in New Zealand, what are the main changes, and do you think it's for the better or for the worse?
Oh, look, I think for me it's for the better. I mean, if you watch, and I've watched it 2 or 3 times, that World Pairs final that Peter Bellis and Ram Brassey played David Bryant and Tony Alcock, and they were going around the car park. And so the game on our greens back in those days was very much you either drew the shot or you drove. There weren't too many in-between shots because the greens and the weight, the amount of turn you got out of your bowls made it really, really difficult to play those yard-on shots and whatnot, especially at 18 seconds. And so in a lot of respects, I think the game's changed for the better with the new bowls, and they've been around for a while now. And the challenge with that is that I think, and this is me being probably a little bit traditional, is that I think we have lost the art of being able to draw and be able to draw within 6 inches when we have to, because the nature of the turn of the bowls means that we can arrive at the head and give ourselves a lot of chances. So, and I think that's, as I say, I think that's to the detriment of the draw game. But having said that, there's still a lot of people that are very consistent on the draw. But I think the game's changed for the better with the advent of these new bowls. And certainly coloured bowls and coloured clothing and all that sort of thing has certainly added to our sport.
Yeah, I find it quite interesting because I think there's we seem to just be, there's more shots to play nowadays, and our top players are good enough that they can do them. So I find it quite exciting to watch our modern game, and then frustrating, of course, when we go to Australia on the slightly slower greens again, when they play their arriving game all the time, and there's plants galore. You're just thinking, please stop. Okay, that's cool. So moving on, I suppose, to the coaching side, and you mentioned that you worked for Bowls New Zealand in the late 90s, and I suppose it's something to do with coaching then. Has that always been like a side passion as well, along with your playing? You've always been interested in coaching the high performance or coaching the players as well?
Yeah, I've coached a lot of people over the years, and that was obviously when I was still playing, and it was just people said, because I could draw well, that was the basis of my game. But I'm not as good as Brass was, but certainly Rowan Brassey was the best draw player I've ever seen. And so people used to ask me to help them with various aspects of their game, continuously over a long period of time. And it's just something that I really enjoyed, watching people get better and achieving success, but more importantly, having more enjoyment because they could play the game just that little bit better. And so it's always been something I've been very interested in. And as I say, my my learnings from the sports psychologist and the mental skills side of the game just made me really passionate about trying to pass on what I'd learned to other people.
Absolutely, and you found, so if you could just explain the role you're in now to us or to me, and then a little bit about how you what that means in a practical sense. So when they go overseas or when you're having your team training camps, what do you do with the Blackjacks?
So that's a very wide-ranging question.
Yep, you can answer it however you want, Mike.
So we're incredibly lucky that we've got a guy called John Quinn that is a part of our high-performance program, and John Quinn's our mental skills coach. And if I'm honest, all of the players that are in the national squad and those that are selected for the national teams, technically, they are very, very good. So there's not a lot can go wrong in terms of them letting the ball go, in terms of their delivery. What it comes down to is how they cope in the moment. And so at that level, the key to it is having a great set of mental skills that allows you to cope, make adjustments, make good decisions, and then execute it. And that's all mental. And so that a fair bit of our work is around tying in what they're good at technically and tactically with what's going on inside their head. And that's really, and the other part to that is I'm hugely passionate about athletes owning and taking responsibility for their learning. So rather than the coach telling people how it should be, it's about guiding and mentoring players so that they can take responsibility for their own learning. That at the end of the day, they're practicing on their own. There's no coach. Well, some have personal coaches, but typically we'll be out there on our own practicing. And it's about taking responsibility for that and owning that and owning their own learning. And I guess that's the philosophy that we've been trying to put in place for the last couple of years with our national squad players.
Absolutely. And like when you have your trainings or your training camps, and obviously there's a bit of mental skills and a bit of everything there, do you is there a way you try and emulate like a match situation? What does it look like for I don't know, Tweedledee, who's a New Zealand player playing in a training camp? What does that day look like for them? How do you train?
So it's a good question, Matt. Well, it depends on what phase we are in the preparation. What we do is we get players to write their own training plans 4 to 6 weeks out before a major event, whether that be a significant domestic event or one of our major international events. And they do that with their high-performance coach in partnership, and they identify the areas of their game that they think they need to work on. And that's, again, part of this philosophy of the players taking ownership of their preparation and their learnings. And they review that weekly, and they try to understand what's gone well in those sessions and whether there are still some work-ons from those sessions that week, and what does that mean in terms of what I'm going to do on the second week, and then the third week, and so on. So because of lack of funding, we don't get together very often at all. In fact, we'd be lucky if we got together more than twice a year. So it's very much a remote environment where we're engaging with the athletes, typically by video conferencing, just trying to understand where they're at, what they're working on, whether they need any support in a particular aspect of their game, and so on. And then when we get together, it's typically only maybe 4 days before competition starts. So there's if they're not ready, Peter Ballas always used to say this, you don't start preparing for the World Champs or the Com Games when you arrive at the venue 4 days out. All that stuff's done. So what are the things that we do in those 4 days? And there's a lot of fine-tuning. We have practice matches, and we've already arranged some practice matches in the lead-up to the World Champs, and we get over on the Gold Coast in August. So it's about getting that match fitness, I guess, is the important thing in those last 3 or 4 days.
Yeah, brilliant. And that's a wonderful segue, Mike, because I was going to ask you about the World Championships next. So as you said, we haven't had one for a long time, 2016. So we've got a squad, or we've got a team picked for the World Champs, including parabowlers this time for the first ever at a World Championships. How are you feeling as the head coach about the New Zealand team that's picked, and how do you think we might go?
Oh, it's hard to predict, but I'm feeling really good about it. We've got 16 athletes and 2 directors for the VI, so that's 18 in total that will be competing. We actually had our initial video conference meeting Wednesday night, and just setting the scene. So they've been given some information and a workbook that Quinny put together, and they've got some stuff they're going to work through and work on over the next 3 months. I'm really comfortable with the team that we've got. I think there's some new blood in there, obviously. They're fizzing. They can't wait to get on the green again and show that they're right up there with the best in the world. I think all, the girls, the boys, the Paras and the BIs have all got big shots should they put everything together on the day or during the week.
Yeah, it's exciting to be sort of on the outside looking in, and I'm excited to see how we go with that. I agree. I think we've got a very good team, and I'm looking forward to them being successful, really. And so I suppose, again, sort of on that note, you're the head coach at the moment, and we look at, say, our top, we have a high performance, a wider group, say 20 men and 20 women. Do you think we're in good stead as a country? Because if we remember, we spoke about your Commonwealth Games medal. You're the last man to win a Commonwealth Games medal, and it was 2 decades ago. That's a while. Do you think we're in good stead as a country if you look at our top 20 going forward? How's the future look for New Zealand as a bowling power?
Well, I think the future looks really good. We've got some new fellas in the men's team. If you recall the Com Games last year, 4 of the 5 women were in their 20s. We've got a whole lot of young fellas and young women that are coming through, and I had the pleasure of working with the under-26s at the Oceania Champs a few weeks ago now, and look, there's some real talent, both girls and boys, that were in that under-26 team. So I think the future is healthy. We've just got to create the right pathways for those young people coming through, and unfortunately the lack of funding makes that more difficult. But, the Oceania Champs were fantastic in terms of giving 10 young people, 5 boys and 5 girls, the opportunity to compete at the next level, and they all came through with flying colours, I have to say. So, yeah, I'm really positive about what the future holds. I think we've got some really good young talent coming through, and we've got some real talent who are there at the moment.
Awesome. Now that's a good answer. And I've got one more question. We've been talking for a while. I just looked at my clock and it's been 3/4 of an hour. So that's great. But it's been an interesting conversation. So I thought my last question, Mike, it should be it's either going to be an easy question to answer or a hard one. But if you look back over the bowls that you've seen, is there a shot that you've seen someone play or you've played yourself under pressure that you remember vividly? You think, good, that was a good bowl that I've seen.
There's lots, and there's lots of great players in the world, and I guess there were 2 or 3 shots that Ali Forsyth played in the final of the 2016 World Fours that come to mind. Ali was on fire during that week with a shot play, and in my mind, when he's on like that, no better shot player in the world. And he played 2 or 3 in that final that were just really special, without singling any one of them out, and without, there's lots of great players. I mean, Aaron Shearer played 2 bombs against us in the final of the Multi-Nations Fours earlier in the year that was simply world class. Look, there's so many to choose from over the years.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
I'm with you. And lastly, my last question, and I should have asked it earlier on, because you can't really talk to someone who grew up in their bowls life in Dunedin and not talk a little bit about Kevin Darling, who sort of is a name that sort of resonates through both indoor and outdoor. I presume you knew him, Mike, and did you play against him or with him, or what were your experiences with Kevin before we let you go?
So Kevin was in that tour of Britain, my first trip. He's simply the best player I've ever seen in terms of pure talent. He was phenomenal. I know he was a brilliant indoor player as well, and I'm not sure whether you ever saw him or witnessed him playing indoor, but he was phenomenal. And look, that's part of why I guess I had such a good introduction to the game is in the 1980s, there were 6 guys from Dunedin that played for New Zealand in the 1980s, and Ian Dickerson, who won a Commonwealth Games gold medal, Kevin Darling, and a World Championship gold medal, Kevin Darling, Terry Scott, the McConnell brothers, and Ken Walker, all 6 of them played for New Zealand in the 1980s. So bowls in Dunedin was incredibly strong in those days, which is why I think I was so fortunate to be in that place at that time.
Brilliant. Good. And that's a nice way to finish that with. So thank you very much, Mike, for joining me on this podcast. And after just about an hour's worth of talking, I'll let you get on.
Thanks, Alex. Appreciate it.